children, you've heard that where there's a will, there's a way. So during the time of slavery, all over the South, secret schools called ebony schools and loft schools were in operation. And some masters secretly taught some of their slaves. The story of a slave called Stephen is a good example.
Have you thought about what I asked you last week, Master?
Yes, Stephen, I have, and I've decided to get you a speller and teach you how to read and write. But you mustn't tell a soul what we're doing. You know what'll happen if someone catches you with that book.
I'll be careful, and I'll keep my mouth shut.
Stephen did learn to read and write, and he began to teach others. He only taught those slaves he could trust. They would meet in the carriage house, the stable loft, or any other secluded place they could find. Classes were held between 10 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning.
Shh. Shh. All right, everybody. Watch your step. Don't make a sound. Now, today's lesson is how to spell words that sound the same. Listen to me. C-A-T spells cat. H-A-T spells hat. F-A-T spells fat. All right, let's spell them together. Whisper, not too loud.
C-A-T spells cat. H-A-T spells hat. F-A-T spells fat.
Very good. Now, everybody, let's try something else.
Stephen Walter Rogers taught many lessons that way down in New Orleans. Meanwhile, black people in the North were constantly petitioning the state legislatures to secure equal educational opportunities and facilities. In Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, black codes maintained school segregation. And in other northern states, even though the state constitutions did not support school segregation, individual city councils and school committees usually did. This struggle continued until after the war between the states. And in 1849, Frederick Douglass raised his majestic voice against the educational inequalities in his own town of Rochester, New York.
The colored citizens of this city pay as freely for the support of schools as any other class. And their children are as much entitled to school privileges as are the sons of the wealthiest of this community. And there can be no sound reason founded in justice why they should be shut out of the fine, airy schoolhouses of the districts and driven into the dull, damp, dark, and badly ventilated cellar of Zion Church. It is a disgrace to the city of Rochester that such an act of flagrant injustice and cruelty can be perpetrated against any class of its citizens.
A black family in Boston, the Roberts family, sued the Boston School Committee for equal school rights back in the 1850s. Benjamin Roberts sued the city of Boston on behalf of his daughter Sarah. He attempted to close the segregated Smith High School and other segregated schools. Roberts was helped by a sizable number of black Bostonians. Charles Sumner, a white man, was their attorney. Later, Sumner was elected to the United States Senate, where he championed Negro rights. The Roberts case went all the way to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of the Roberts family. Sumner helped to establish the principle that segregated schools were incapable of offering equal educational opportunities. In 1855, separate schools were abolished in Boston.
Grandpa, weren't schools set up in Canada for runaway slaves?
Yes, Carol. The Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 forced many black people to flee to Canada. Canada was the freest place in North America for Negroes. Mary Shad Carey, a free black school teacher from Washington, D.C., established a school at one of the Canadian communities for refugees. Also, there was Josiah Henson. He helped to build schools in the settlement near Windsor, Canada. He established a school for old and young students.
The 1850s ran their course.
The 1860s burst upon the scene. America went to war in order to solve by fire and sword what her politicians could not solve through reason.
In this bitter struggle, the freedom of black men became an important issue. This became a time of testing.
Testing whether this nation or any nation can long endure, half slave, half free.
Early in the Civil War, the Union forces captured Fortress Monroe at Hampton, Virginia, and a group of islands off the coast of South Carolina. The government and a number of civilian volunteers embarked upon a noble experiment of educating slaves to become productive citizens. This could have become a pattern for the Reconstruction period. Mary Peaks at Fortress Monroe and Charlotte Fortin in South Carolina, two Afro-American teachers, were among the first volunteers. Miss Fortin's thoughts and feelings about this great adventure are recorded in her journal.
I've never seen children so eager to learn. Coming to school is a constant delight and recreation to them. They come here as other children go to play. The older ones, during the summer, work in the fields from early morning until 11 or 12 o'clock and then come to school. After their hard toil in the hot sun, as bright and as anxious to learn as ever. Of course, there are slow ones, but these are in the minority. The majority learn with wonderful rapidity. Many of the grown people are also desirous of learning to read. It is wonderful how a people who have been so long crushed to the earth can have so great a desire for knowledge and such a capacity for attaining it.
In other parts of the war-ravaged South, the Union government did not know what to do with the slaves, sometimes called black contraband. Union Army chaplains were given the task of providing for their health, education, and welfare. Henry Minton Turner was one of the Negro chaplains who helped to meet this challenge. The Union Army was also helped by private organizations such as the Freedmen's Aid Societies and various church associations. A number of black men such as John Langston, Hiram Revels, and Francis Cardoza went south to help their fellow men. Some of them later became elected officials of various southern states. And during the Civil War, the black soldiers were not only very brave, but they also helped each other to learn to read and write. And in the Freedmen's Bureau, established by Congress in March of 1865, many black people worked as paid agents and volunteers, including Langston and Cardoza, and newcomers like Fanny Jackson and Louise DeMorty, both of whom had been educated at Oberlin College. Educating the freedmen was one of the Bureau's major purposes, but it also helped freedmen to find jobs and to receive fair labor contracts and fair treatment under the law. The Bureau cooperated with the American Missionary Society and with various other educational groups. The missionaries supplied the teachers and paid their salaries. There were also Freedmen's Aid Societies, who together with the missionary societies raised some $6 million to educate freedmen. Blacks themselves contributed substantially.
Grandfather, tell John about the Negro Colleges.
A number of Negro colleges began a century ago, but they didn't start off with giant steps. They began with their students where they were and tried to teach them as much as they could. Many of these students went out and taught others. Right after the Civil War, almost 20 colleges and universities were established within a 5-year period. Many of these are still in existence, such as Virginia Union, Shaw, Fisk, Lincoln, Talladega, Morehouse, Howard, Hampton, Johnson C. Smith, Philander Smith, Atlanta University, Clark, Dillard, Bois State, Morgan, Russ, Tougaloo, St. Augustine, and Claflin.
Of course, some of these schools, like Dillard and Morgan, were organized under different names than they bear today. Moreover, two schools that are still in existence, Wilberforce in Ohio and Lincoln in Pennsylvania, were actually founded before the Civil War in the 1850s. In the years immediately following the Civil War, the most important black men were congressmen and other elected officials in the South. However, in the important field of education, a number of black men served as teachers and administrators for various school systems. One of the most outstanding was Pennsylvania-born Jonathan C. Gibbs, who became superintendent of public instruction of the state of Florida from 1872 through 1874, and who drafted the Basic Act providing for Florida's public school system.
Some people call the Reconstruction years the Negro's finest hour.
Little did they know that the hour was late, and that darkness would once more come over the land.
And bands of night riders would defy the law and bring death and terror to the freedman, and once more restrain his liberty.
Old leaders such as Frederick Douglass would pass from the scene, and new leaders such as Booker T. Washington, founder of Tuskegee Institute, would emerge.
In 1895, Washington, speaking before the Southern Exposition at Atlanta, said that in things economic, Negroes and whites could be as a closed fist, but in all things social, black and white people could be as separate as the fingers of the hand.
And in 1896, separate but equal would become the law of the land. Down in New Orleans, Homer Plessy, a quadroon, had been arrested because he would not ride in the railroad car for Negroes. His case, Plessy versus Ferguson, was taken all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court ruled in 1896 that separation of the races was not unlawful.
Meanwhile, in 1895, Massachusetts-born W.E.B. Dubois was earning his Ph.D. degree from Harvard University. He gathered around himself a small group of college-trained professionals and intellectuals who were opposed to the separate but equal doctrine. In their drive towards equality, this group formed the Niagara Movement, forerunner of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
By 1900, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois had become recognized as the leading spokesmen for black Americans. Washington, on the one hand, stressed industrial education as the surest path for Afro-Americans. He summed up his ideas this way.
I would set no limits to the attainments of the Negro in arts, in letters, or statesmanship. But I believe the surest way to reach those ends is by laying the foundation in the little things of life that lie immediately about one's door. I plead for industrial education and development for the Negro, not because I want to cramp him, but because I want to free him. I want to see him enter the all-powerful business and commercial world.
Booker T. Washington has often been criticized for his social and educational views. But if we look at him in terms of when and where he lived, we must admit he did make a tremendous contribution. In 1881, he took some land, a little money, and a lot of willpower, and developed a school that educated many Negroes. W.E.B. Du Bois, on the other hand, believed that industrial education was not enough. He believed that education had to strengthen the Negro's character, increase his knowledge, and teach him to earn a living.
Education is that whole system of human training, within and without the schoolhouse walls, which molds and develops men. If then we start out to train an unskilled people, our system must set for itself two great aims. One, dealing with knowledge and character, and the other, seeking to give the child the technical knowledge necessary for him to earn a living under present circumstances. But there must be those trained to teach in these schools. Men and women of knowledge and culture and technical skill, who understand modern civilization and have the training and aptitude to impart it to the children under them.
Between 1896 and 1954, education for Negroes was separate but unequal all over America. School boundaries were drawn to exclude black people, and much less money was spent on their education. Georgia, in 1908, spent 99 cents to educate each black child, and $6.80 to educate each white child. In 1915, the state of South Carolina spent $16.22 to educate each white child, and $1.93 to educate each black child. In 4 southern states, the annual salary for white teachers was around $287, and for Negroes, $128.50. $1.83. And until the 1954 Supreme Court decision, there were still segregated schools in many northern states. In the early 1900s, black parents in Alton, Illinois, Dayton, Ohio, East Orange, New Jersey, and other cities used sit-ins, boycotts, and court cases to desegregate their school systems. And for a long while, many northern school systems did not hire Negro teachers. Meanwhile, by 1933, there were nearly 40,000 black students enrolled in colleges. Most of them attended predominantly Negro colleges. Some attended northern schools, but even here they had difficulty securing admission to graduate, law, medical, and dental schools. In the South, they couldn't go, period. The majority of black dentists and physicians were trained at either Howard or Meharry, both black schools.
How did black students finally get into Southern white colleges?
Court cases, and decision after decision. The United States Supreme Court struck down admission barriers. And it was the NAACP and its tireless lawyers that deserve most of the credit. They spent untold hours and years preparing the cases that led to important decisions. Cases were fought in the courts from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, up to that special day of May 17th, 1954.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The United States Supreme Court is now in session.
We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal.
Unequal education for black people in this country still continues.
Yes, Carol, you're right. Today we are still striving for equal opportunities in education.
Grandpa, you always say that we are the 14th generation Americans. When will we be free?
That's a good question, John. We've come a long way, but we've got to keep moving on. For the sake of ourselves, our people, and all Americans. That's why you and Carol must get a good education.
Yes, the black man's quest for education has been a vital element in the never-ending struggle towards his full citizenship. The quest has persisted during and after his years of slavery, amidst trials and triumphs, opportunity and opposition. Many steadfast or somewhat fortunate black men and women have managed to find the light, and they in turn have shared it with their black brothers. Many valiant white people have also played their part. As the nation entered the last half of the 20th century, her highest court decreed that racial segregation in public education is unconstitutional. The quest became intensified. So also did the opposition. As the final quarter of the century approaches, the tide is turning. The prospect of equitable opportunity for black Americans finally looms bright on the distant horizon. The quest goes forward.